All right, let's do this. Ready for a deep dive?
Always up for a deep dive.
Okay, so you guys requested this one. It's about perseverance, faith, and gratitude, all wrapped up in a recent sermon. And honestly, it really hit me hard too.
Yeah, powerful stuff.
It all starts with this song, It Ain't Over Yet. And man, you know those moments when you're like right in the thick of it, feeling heartbroken and just got to keep pushing forward?
Oh, absolutely. Been there.
That's the vibe. But it's not just about the struggle, right? It's also about this underlying faith. Like, even when you can't see it yet, you know the sun's going to rise again.
Exactly. It's that trust, that knowing that even though things are tough right now, they will get better.
And the sermon, it takes those ideas, the perseverance and the faith, and it goes even deeper, using this story from the Bible about 10 lepers.
10 lepers healed by Jesus.
Right. Healed by Jesus. But only one of them comes back to say thank you. It makes you think, right? Like, why wouldn't all 10 be just overflowing with gratitude?
It's a good question. And the sermon suggests maybe some people, they feel entitled to good things, or even that God owes them something.
That God owes me mentality, that's a tough one.
It is. And I think we've all met people who kind of have that attitude, maybe without even realizing it. They're always praying for things to change, but they're not really willing to put in the work themselves.
It's like they're looking for that easy fix, the quick win, without understanding that real growth comes from the struggle, from putting in the effort.
Absolutely. Real transformation doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to learn and grow.
And, the sermon kind of throws a curveball in there, a reality check. It reminds us that if we're going strictly by our actions, well, we haven't really earned anything from God.
Romans 6.23, it's pretty clear about that. The consequence of sin, it's not a pretty picture.
Not pretty at all. But then, and this is where it gets really interesting, the whole point is that we don't get what we deserve.
Enter grace.
Exactly. Grace. Think of it like getting this amazing gift you didn't even earn, completely out of the blue. That's grace, and it's a total game changer.
It is, because, the idea that we don't get what we deserve on the surface, that could be terrifying.
Yeah, they're kidding.
But with grace, it becomes this incredible opportunity. It's freedom from that pressure of having to be perfect, having to earn God's love.
It's like a weight lifted. Right.
Yeah.
You could breathe again. But then the sermon asked this question that really made me stop and think. Did you ever see God working in your life before you really decided to follow him?
That's a profound question.
The sermon tells the story about a guy stuck on his roof during a flood. He's praying like crazy to be rescued, but the second he hears the rescue crew coming, he's all, never mind, God, I got this.
Oh, man, I think we've all been there in some way. We pray for help, and then when the answer shows up, maybe not in the way we expected, we take all the credit. It was my brilliant planning, we say.
When really, God was working behind the scenes the whole time. It's like we're so focused on our own efforts that we miss how God is orchestrating things, answering our prayers in ways we might not even recognize.
We can be so quick to dismiss the possibility of divine intervention, can't we?
And the sermon's not trying to make us feel bad. It's about opening our eyes to the possibility that God is working in ways we don't expect, even in those ordinary, everyday moments.
It's a shift in perspective, looking for God's hand in the seemingly mundane. Like, have you ever had one of those days where everything just goes right?
Oh, yeah.
You hit every green light, you find the perfect parking spot, good news seems to come out of nowhere. What if those aren't just random coincidences? What if those are tiny miracles sprinkled throughout our day?
I love that. Seeing those little wins as mini miracles. That takes us back to that question from the sermon. What has God been doing that you haven't acknowledged? Have you ever thought that maybe some of the things you've chalked up to luck or even your own awesomeness could actually be signs of God working in your life?
It's a challenge to stop and ask ourselves, where have I seen God move, even if I didn't realize it at the time? It's about being more aware, more grateful for the unseen forces that might be guiding and protecting us.
And that idea of noticing God's presence, it ties in beautifully with this idea of being a giver instead of a taker. The sermon really hammered home the point that as followers of Christ, we should be known for our generosity, for reflecting God's giving nature in the world.
It's a fundamental part of our faith, isn't it? To give freely, to be a source of blessing for others.
Because when you think about it, generosity, it's an act of faith too. It's trusting that there's enough to go around, that we won't run out if we share what we have. It's believing that our acts of kindness, no matter how small, can have a ripple effect in the world.
It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, realizing that we're all part of something much larger than ourselves.
And it's not just about material things, is it? It's about giving our time, our attention, our encouragement, our forgiveness. It's about being present for people, listening without judging, offering a helping hand when someone is struggling.
Those acts of giving, those expressions of love and compassion, they don't have to be grand or showy. It's the everyday kindnesses, the small gestures of support that can truly touch someone's life.
Sometimes the most powerful giving is about letting go, wouldn't you say? Letting go of grudges, the need to be right, the desire to control everything. It's about surrendering our own ego, letting God's love flow through us.
Beautifully put, because true giving, true generosity, it comes from a place of abundance, not scarcity.
And that brings us to, well, a pretty big question. It's a big question, right? It's that idea of surrendering to God's lordship.
That's a deep one for sure.
It's not just about saying you believe in God, right? It's about making him the boss, handing him the keys to your life.
It's like saying, okay, God, you're in charge now. Lead the way.
And that can be kind of scary, can't it? Like, what if I mess things up? What if I make the wrong choices?
It's a natural fear, for sure, to think, what if I lose control?
But here's the thing the sermon was saying, sometimes surrendering is actually how you find real freedom.
It's a paradox, isn't it? But it's true. When we let go of our own need to control everything, when we trust God's plan, that's where real peace and purpose come in.
It's like taking that weight off your shoulders, handing it over to someone who can actually handle it. But even when we do surrender, the sermon also touched on how we can still fall into this trap of thinking God owes us something.
Right. Like, if we're good people, if we pray hard enough, then life should be smooth sailing.
But that's not always how it works, is it?
Not always, no. And the truth is, as the sermon reminded us, we've all messed up. We've all fallen short.
And that's where grace comes in again, like that unearned gift, that unconditional love that says, you don't have to be perfect. I love you just as you are.
And that's a hard concept to grasp sometimes, In a world where we're constantly told to strive, to achieve, to earn our worth.
It's like we're programmed to think we have to prove ourselves. The grace, it flips the script. It says, you're already worthy just because you exist.
It takes the pressure off. It allows us to breathe. And to be honest, it's incredibly freeing.
And when we understand that we're loved unconditionally, that changes how we treat other people too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We're less likely to judge, to criticize, to hold on to those grudges.
We can let go of that need to be right all the time and just embrace the fact that we're all perfectly imperfect.
And you know what? The sermon talked about how powerful it can be to share our own stories of God's grace with others.
Especially for people who might be doubting, who are struggling with their faith. It's not about preaching or trying to convert them. It's just about being real, being vulnerable.
Just sharing what God has done in our lives. Because sometimes hearing someone else's story, that's what helps us to believe.
It's like saying, hey, I've been there. I get it. And you know what? God showed up for me. And he can show up for you too.
It's a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, that there's hope, even when things feel impossible.
And speaking of hope, the sermon also talked about how we often pray without really believing that God will answer. Like we go through the motions, but deep down we're not really expecting anything to change.
It's like we're just going through the motions, checking off the box, but we're not really putting our hearts into it.
And this sermon, it challenged us to approach prayer with a different attitude, with that childlike wonder, that sense of expectation that anything is possible.
Remember when you were a kid and you made a wish on a dandelion or a shooting star? You didn't overthink it, you just believed with all your heart.
That's the kind of faith we need to tap back into.
Because prayer isn't just about asking for things. It's about connecting with God, with the one who knows us better than we know ourselves.
It's about opening our hearts to his guidance, his wisdom, his love. And sometimes that means accepting that his answer might be no, or not yet, or even, I have something even better in store for you.
And that takes trust, doesn't it? To surrender our own plans and desires and say, okay, God, I trust your will even if I don't understand it.
Because his ways are higher than our ways.
Right.
Right? He sees the bigger picture, the things we can't even begin to grasp. But even when we're trusting God, even when we're trying to be givers, the sermon acknowledged how easy it is to get bogged down by the problems in our lives.
Oh, absolutely. We can get so focused on what's wrong that we miss all the good things that are happening around us.
It's like we're wearing those negativity glasses that filter out all the sunshine and only let in the storm clouds.
We've all been there, stuck in that negative feedback loop where all we can see are the challenges and the obstacles. But the sermon, it encouraged us to ditch those negativity glasses and put on a pair of gratitude lenses instead.
To start looking for the good, to appreciate the blessings, big and small, that are already present in our lives. Because when we shift our focus from what's lacking to what we already have, it changes everything.
It opens our hearts to joy, to contentment, to a deeper appreciation for all the abundance that surrounds us.
And it allows us to see God's hand at work in ways we might have missed before. Those everyday moments that we took for granted, suddenly they become infused with meaning and purpose.
We start to see the beauty in the ordinary, the miracles in the mundane, the love that's always present, even when we don't feel it.
And that brings us to, well, a pretty powerful question that the sermon posed. And it's one that I think everyone needs to wrestle with at some point. It's a question that really gets to the heart of it all. Have you ever truly surrendered to his lordship?
Surrendered. It's a powerful word, isn't it?
It is. And I think for some people it can sound a little intimidating, maybe even a little scary. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, I get that. But the sermon was saying it's not about giving up. It's about letting go. It's about trusting God's plan for your life, even when you don't understand it.
Like handing over the reins, right? Saying, okay, God, you're the expert here. Lead the way.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is when you do that, when you surrender, you often find a whole new level of freedom. It's like you're finally living the life you were created for.
And that life, the sermon was saying, it's a life of giving. Remember that question, giver or taker. It's a challenge to really look at ourselves, at our actions, and be honest about where we fall on that spectrum.
Are we mostly focused on what we can get, or are we looking for ways to give back, to bless others?
It's easy to get caught up in that me-first mentality, isn't it? Especially in today's world.
Oh, for sure. We're constantly bombarded with messages about self-care, self-improvement, getting ahead. But the sermon reminded us that true fulfillment comes from looking outward, from using our gifts and resources to make a difference in the world.
And it doesn't have to be some grand, heroic act, right? It's those everyday acts of kindness that really matter.
Absolutely. Holding the door for someone, offering a listening ear, sharing a meal, even just smiling at a stranger. Those little things can make a huge impact.
And the more we practice giving, the more it becomes a part of who we are. It's like we're training our hearts to be more attuned to the needs of others.
We start to see opportunities for generosity everywhere we look.
The sermon ended with this beautiful image of God offering us grace, forgiveness, unconditional love, things we don't deserve. But it also reminded us that he wants to work in our lives, to use us for his purposes.
Like we're invited to be a part of something much bigger than ourselves, to partner with God in bringing his love and light to the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this question for you. What seemingly ordinary events in your life might actually be evidence of God's grace or guidance if you looked at them through a different lens? Maybe it's a chance encounter, an unexpected opportunity, a moment of clarity or peace that came at just the right time.
It's an invitation to pay attention, to notice those subtle whispers of his presence in the midst of your everyday life.
And to remember that even when it feels like it ain't over yet, his story is still unfolding in you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep trusting in the one who holds your story in his hands.